Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Here's a look at today's show. The biggest political shakeup Mexico has seen in decades. More on the landslide victory of leftist candidate Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador coming up. Then the fourth biggest river in America under threat. The Rio Grande dried out in early spring this year for the first time ever, a warning sign that reserves are low. And one of the most iconic institutions in New York in crisis. Yellow cabs are being driven off the streets by ride-sharing apps. I'm Jeannie Godula. We'll start first in Mexico with that landslide victory for Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. He won more than half the votes in the presidential race, a record since the country's shift to democracy nearly 20 years ago. The firebrand politician is the first leftist leader to take power in as many years, upsetting establishment figures from the center-right. Lopez Obrador will now have to get to work tackling violence, corruption, and endemic poverty in Mexico, as well as the strained relationship with neighbors to the north. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has more.
Winning a landslide in the election was the easy part. Now comes the heavy lifting. Among Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's challenges as Mexico's new president, the first was addressed just hours after his victory. That is, relations with the United States. Obrador said he'd spoken to US President Donald Trump for half an hour and that they discussed key development projects. Trump echoed that sentiment, saying he was looking forward to working with him. This despite the fact that the leftist politician had previously threatened to, quote, put Trump in his place, and that anti-Mexican rhetoric was a key feature of the US president's campaign, especially with regards to immigration.
Either Trump begins to insist with the same pounding tactics he used against Peña Nieto, and it will be really interesting to see how a new team with little experience would deal with that sort of crisis, or Lopez Obrador begins to build legitimacy at home, dealing with problems he might have in his first year by creating a problem with the United States.
US-Mexico relations have also soured over trade. Obrador has said he'll push for a revised NAFTA agreement. President Trump has long criticized the deal, even threatening to pull out of the North American trade bloc. It's a vital pact for Mexico, which sends 80% of its exports to the US. Washington's recent decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from Mexico has only added to the tension, since Obrador is under pressure to improve the country's economic outlook. But for many Mexicans, the number one priority is tackling crime. The country witnessed a record 25,000 murders last year alone. Rampant violence, much of which is linked to drug trafficking. Obrador has said his approach will address the root causes of these social problems.
The failed strategy to tackle insecurity and violence will change. More than using force, we will attack the causes that create insecurity and violence. I'm convinced that the most efficient and most humane way to confront these evils is necessarily to fight inequality and poverty.
Social projects, he said, will benefit the youth, elderly and the agricultural sector, and that will be funded with the billions of dollars recouped from stamping out graft in politics and public institutions, a project that many fear is simply too ambitious.
Firefighters in Northern California are battling a massive blaze that's threatening nearly 1,000 homes and buildings. Hundreds of homes have been under evacuation orders for days now, derailing plans for the July 4th national holiday. Another wildfire in the mountains of Colorado destroyed more than 100 homes there. And as the fires continue to burn, America's fourth biggest river is facing a different threat. That's the Rio Grande in New Mexico that dried out in early spring this year for the first time ever. Ellen Gainsford has the details.
Over these 40 kilometers of riverbed, cars can pass as easily as on a country road. The Rio Grande is the fourth largest river in the United States, but it's in danger of drying up.
how often it dries has increased a lot. This year was really unusual because it started about 2.5 months before it normally does.
The river usually only dries out in the middle of summer. This year, the bed was parched at the beginning of spring. This team of conservationists rake the pools of water that are left behind. They're searching for fish. They hope to save some of the rarer species.
There's been less snowpack and less water over the long term, but there's still any year, obviously it could be different, but over the long term, yeah, I think there's less water.
The Rio Grande is fed by water from the Colorado mountains. Last year, there wasn't much snow. That's why this part of the river has dried up. The hydrologists who manage the flow have diverted water from here to areas where people are in need, near towns and farms. Nick Carrasco's property runs along the banks of the river, but he's not sure if he can water his crops this year. He's on a waiting list behind other farmers.
Well, you got to get on the list. So they'll start with the top, giving those guys water. They're first on the list, and they may run out of water before they get to us. So we'll have to wait for the next go-around.
Many in the area believe the towns are using too much water.
They used to pump from ground, and now a lot of them pump directly out of the river.
Why?
Well, it's cheaper, it's better, and they need the water. They got to wash the Mercedes, you know.
The population of the valley has doubled in the past 30 years, and many people aren't concerned about saving water.
What are we supposed to do? Save water? Water is life, I understand that.
In Albuquerque, a city of 600,000 people, there's a hosepipe ban when temperatures go up. People are encouraged to have stone driveways, not lawns. All the water that's preserved goes back to the river.
Not only are we using less water per person, but we're using less water overall than we were using 25 years ago. And that's all because of conservation.
But it might not be enough. The average temperature in the region has gone up by 1.5 degrees in the last 20 years. The future of the river is in doubt.
It's time now for our number of the week, 75. That is for the 75% drop in the cost of a yellow cab taxi medallion in just 5 years. Those metallic licenses are required for taxis to legally pick up fares in New York. But with the arrival of car-sharing apps like Uber or Lyft, the taxi business is in free fall. That has been a big hit for cab drivers and the job that was once a good bet for lower middle-class citizens or newly arrived immigrants to live the American dream. But for many now, that dream has become a nightmare. Our correspondent Daniel Hoffman reports from New York.
William Guerra has been driving his cab around the streets of New York for more than 3 decades. To support his family, he's made lots of sacrifices.
I never saw my kids, baseball game, basketball game. I had to work. So I said, well, I'll do that now that I'm young. I was planning for this to be my retirement.
The 63-year-old man of Cuban descent paid a fortune for his medallion, a permit required to operate in New York. His loan, coupled with his mortgage, was a burden, but he thought of this as a long-term investment.
It was a way to make money, be your own boss, put your own hours, and thinking in the future, because the medallion used to go up, never down.
The once coveted New York license peaked at over $1 million 5 years ago. This former traffic commissioner says that's when ride-sharing apps like Uber entered the markets.
Uber and Lyft came on the scene like no one expected it. Just suddenly became easy to get to. You get out your smartphone app, you push a button, and the car and driver shows up. It was comfortable, quick, reliable. When you get out, you don't even have to stop to pay. You just get out and say, have a good day.
The impact for New York was dire. Fewer customers in the yellow cabs, the value of the medallions plummeted, and scores of drivers were overwhelmed by debt. Kenny Cho was one of them. He had bought his medallion for $700,000 but couldn't pay it back. A few weeks ago, he took his own life.
He feels like very sad, very depressed,
and because he don't make enough money, and he's missing. His wife calling me. I told his wife, okay, you wait. I'm looking where's the car is located. My brothers know it's not in the car. After that, the body was in the water. So I'm very, very sad, you know.
Once a week, cab drivers gather outside City Hall. They want better protection against Uber, as 6 of their peers have reportedly committed suicide since January.
Driver power! Union power!
Many say that unless nothing is done, they could just become another name on the list.
A lighter note now, and World Cup madness is reaching fever pitch. Here in France, all eyes are on the quarterfinal match this Friday with Uruguay. But the jury is still out on whether or not Uruguay star player Edinson Cavani will make the game. The Paris Saint-Germain striker suffered a hamstring injury in the last 16 win over Portugal. Our France 24 Sports team has more.
He's a star striker. Edinson Cavani has scored more goals than any other player for his team Paris Saint-Germain, beating even Zlatan Ibrahimovic's record. Unlike his predecessor, Cavani doesn't like the limelight, but he's come a long way from his humble beginnings growing up in Uruguay.
All that I did was play football and play more football.
This is where he made his debut, in the city of Salto, 500 kilometers from the capital, Montevideo. The same football ground that Luis Suarez played on growing up.
This ground has been touched by a magic wand because it has already produced top athletes, and in my opinion, there will be more athletes of the same level coming up.
Like his teammate Suarez, Cavani is a role model for these budding footballers. The local club insists that the young players behave on and off the pitch. When he's not playing, Cavani likes to lose himself in nature, indulging his passion for fishing. It's a long way from the image of a bling-bling footballer.
I'm proud of his behavior. He has stayed humble. And I think that he is a good example for a lot of young people in our city, Salto.
When his footballing days are over, the PSG striker plans on having a second career as a plant and soil scientist, returning to his roots, far from the frantic football lifestyle.
We'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching this Inside the Americas. We'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa on France 24 and France24.com.